Welcome back to the Last Days Book Club, where we're reading the book It Must Have Been an Angel by Marjorie Lewis Lloyd. This book is a collection of true stories related by persons who had angelic encounters, as well as other providential tales of divine interventions compiled from various Christian publications. In our last reading, we covered chapters 12 through 14, where we discovered that the touch of angels' hands brings miraculous healing, as when Dr. David Duffy in a missionary medical outpost in Peru contracted the bubonic plague and no help was available. He was fallen into a coma, after which certain death would follow. His desperate wife, after doing all she could only call the teachers and missionaries from a nearby institution to come and pray for him. They prayed immediately upon hearing the news, and when she returned from attending to an emergency at the clinic, her husband was up and dressed and preparing to go on his rounds. Miraculously healed, as was Nandis, a young leper in Papua New Guinea, who, after he learned enough pidgin English in the hospital to understand the witness of an SDA pastor who showed him how Jesus healed lepers and paralytics in the Bible, believed with all his heart and continued to believe despite setbacks in his treatment. In a dream, a man in white appeared to him, held his hands, and told him he would be healed. Upon awaking, he was indeed miraculously healed. In chapter 13, we learn that angels care for us because Jesus cared enough to die for us. Angels care enough to lead a little 3-year-old down 3 flights of dark, dangerous steps. And they care enough to provide wood from an outdoor woodpile and light a fire for a crippled elderly lady in Anchorage, Alaska, in 30 below temperature, in answer to her prayer, and leaving no tracks in the snow. And in chapter 14, we realize that angels operate on the fringes of events, such as when 2-year-old Ray was lost in a cornfield maze and was found by his father's mare, which was led by an unseen hand directly to where he was sitting, and who was protected from harm by a bobcat while he was lost, since Ray continued to talk about him petting a big kitty at the time when bobcats were often sighted in that area of Mississippi. This and many other stories continue to remind us that angels are operating on the fringes all around us so that we might know that God has always cared and still cares. We continue our reading today with chapter 15, entitled The Wonder of Commitment. Why is it that some people live a humdrum existence perpetually on the brink of despair, while others, fascinated by the artistry of each new sunset, delighted by the song of birds, live forever on the edge of wonder? Why is it that some dreary souls are always expecting the worst, while others are busy thanking God for miracles that haven't happened yet? Drudgery will blow out a man's hope if he lets it, but wonder walks on tiptoe, ready for anything. Stories of God's power and of the loving care of angels ought to boost our faith to a new high, but in the reaction of some of you, there may be a hint of discouragement. Someone may be saying, "Why do all the spectacular things happen to other people? I pray. I've prayed all my life, but nothing extraordinary happens to me. Why?" And that's a good question to ask, because it ought not to be that way. It doesn't need to be. Is it possible that some of us have never experienced a spectacular deliverance from danger simply because we have never been in that kind of danger? God does not work miracles for show. He works where there is a need. But the problem goes deeper than that. Answers to prayer, just as definite, though not necessarily as spectacular, ought to be an everyday thing in the life of the Christian. If it isn't that way, there has to be a reason. Have you ever tried demonstrating the faith you say you have by thanking God for things He does before He does them? I'm not advocating presumption. Certainly, I'm not suggesting that we demand anything of God, or set time limits for Him, or tell Him how to answer our prayers, or even ask for some sign that He hears us. Every request we make must be left in His hands, to be answered according to His will, with a negative answer just as acceptable to us as an affirmative one. As for a sign that He hears us, why should we need it? The evidence is in the promise. We know the Bible definition of faith. Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Hebrews 11 and verse 1. Substance. That's pretty real, isn't it? Pretty substantial. That's something to take hold of. Now tell me, if you have the substance of what you hope for, if you actually have it, what is the first thing you do? You thank God for it, don't you? So faith thanks God, thanks Him enthusiastically, even though it cannot yet see the thing it hopes for. Faith knows it has the answer. The evidence is in the promise. Now this may seem like going out on a limb. It may seem almost insane to tell people God is going to sell you a house at just the right time when you haven't had a nibble for 6 months. But faith can thank Him every day and with real enthusiasm that He's going to do just that. This doesn't mean that He will do it on any certain day, or sell it to the person you have picked out, or for the exact price you have in mind. It just means that He will take care of the matter in the best way, in His way, and in His time. And besides, if He doesn't want you to sell it at all, do you want to? I might as well confess that I had this very experience recently. Not a nibble for more than 6 months, but I kept telling people that God would sell it at the right time, and I kept thanking Him. Actually, if the house had sold during those months, it would have been a serious problem, for I had no place to move. But 5 days after my circumstances were such that I could move, 3 couples wanted the house. In this matter of thanking God for what He does before He does it, I'm not taking an extreme position. The servant of the Lord says, not because we see or feel that God hears us are we to believe. We are to trust in His promises. When we come to Him in faith, every petition enters the heart of God. When we have asked for His blessing, we should believe that we receive it and thank Him that we have received it. Then we are to go about our duties, assured that the blessing will be realized when we need it most. When we have learned to do this, we shall know that our prayers are answered. God will do for us exceeding abundantly according to the riches of His glory and the working of His mighty power. Catch the highlights of this marvelous statement. Not because we see. Thank Him that we have received it. And then this priceless sentence. When we have learned to do this, we shall know that our prayers are answered. Are you learning? Did you know how to take a request to God and get an answer? It was many years ago that the manager of one of our large sanitariums was invited to accept the supervision of another larger institution. He was reluctant to go, especially because his children were attending a nearby college. Yet he wanted to do the Lord's will. Finally, he asked counsel of W.C. White, son of Ellen White, who had long been a friend. And W.C. White was surprised by the question. He placed his hand on the younger man's shoulder and asked, "Do you mean to tell me, Myron, that after all these years in the Lord's work, you haven't learned how to get down on your knees and ask God a question and get an answer? The pen of inspiration tells us how. Those who decide to do nothing in any line that will displease God will know, after presenting their case before Him, just what course to pursue. And they will receive not only wisdom, but strength. Power for obedience, for service, will be imparted to them as Christ has promised. Those who can go to their knees and get an answer are those who have made a very special commitment to their Lord. Those who decide to do nothing in any line that will displease the Lord are those who have made a complete commitment, an unreserved commitment, an unreserved surrender to His will. There can be no barrier, nothing held back, no idols, no other gods. What have we done with Jesus? That is the question. Lloyd John Ogilvie says it well. Take Him in. Accept Him as the greatest man who ever lived. Revere Him as the most penetrating psychologist who ever analyzed life. Mark the calendar BC and AD. Plan your customs around His birth, death, and resurrection. Speak of the gentle Jesus, meek and mild. Paint portraits of Him with the libraries full of line and verse about Him. Sing for Him. Preach about Him. We will have done everything we can with human skill and adoration, except one: made Him the absolute Lord of our lives. Everything except make Him Lord, but nothing else will do. If your prayer experience or mine is humdrum, there has to be a reason. For there is no limit to what the Lord Jesus will do for us if we will not hold Him at a distance. But if we would live on the edge of wonder, we must leave our gods behind. For heaven begins when we let go of earth. What happens to our prayers depends upon the quality of our relationship with the Lord Jesus. If that relationship is casual, our experience will be casual. God does not want a half-hearted commitment. He wants all there is of us. Yet we shrink from that kind of commitment. We hold back from a complete surrender. But the man who doesn't want to get into Christianity too deep, the man who wants to keep a hand on the parachute so he can jump out if he chooses, that man is left holding a hollow profession that can never satisfy. He will never know what might have been. The way to miss it all is to go only halfway. If we stop short of complete surrender, we find the Christian life only an intolerable burden. We miss the wonder and excitement that Jesus has planned for us. Heaven is so near, we can almost touch it, but it is only for those who have let go of earth. The wonder of a fully surrendered life cannot be described. It can only be experienced. The excitement of answered prayer, the companionship of angels, days so filled with happy surprises that you can hardly wait for tomorrow to see what God is up to next. Faith grows fast when you live constantly on the edge of wonder. Ceilings are soon gone. Horizons are pushed back. There is no limit to what God can do for and with the man or woman or youth who makes an unreserved commitment. When such a one runs out of earth, heaven is waiting. The end of chapter 15. Chapter 16. The clock that struck 13. Some stories are so outstanding that they deserve a separate telling. This is the first of 4 favorites of mine that belong in that category. or so it seems to me. It was midnight in the town of Plymouth, England. Two men stood by the town's great clock. As it finished striking the hour, both men, strangers, remarked that it had struck 13 times instead of 12. One of these men was a gentleman by the name of Captain Jarvis. It was not long after this that Captain Jarvis awoke early one morning, got up, dressed, and went down to the front door of his home. As he opened it, he saw to his surprise that his groom was standing there with his horse saddled and bridled, ready for him to mount. The groom explained, "I had a feeling that you would be wanting your horse, sir." He said the feeling had been so strong that he couldn't stay in bed, but had to get up and get the horse ready. This was strange. It had never happened before. But since the horse was ready, he mounted and rode off. Not having to go anywhere in particular, he let the horse choose where he would take him. Soon they were down by the river, close to the spot where a ferry took passengers across. Imagine his surprise at this early hour to see the ferryman there with his boat, waiting to take him across. What was going on? "How are you here so early, my man?" he inquired. "I couldn't rest in my bed, sir, for I had a feeling I was wanted to ferry someone across." The captain and the horse got on the boat, and soon they were on the other side. Now what? Again, he let the horse direct the course he would take. After some time, they came to a large country town, and seeing a passerby, the captain inquired if anything of interest was going on in the town. "No, sir. Nothing but the trial of a man for murder." So, with no other destination in mind for this strange trip, he thought he would see what was going on. He rode to the place of the trial, dismounted, and entered the building. As he walked in, he heard the judge saying to the prisoner, "Have you anything to say for yourself? Anything at all?" And the prisoner said, "I have nothing to say, sir, except that I am an innocent man. There is only one man in all the world who could prove my innocence, but I do not know his name nor where he lives. Some weeks ago, we stood together in the town of Plymouth when it was midnight. We both heard the great town clock strike 13 instead of 12, and we remarked about it to each other. How strange it was that the clock should strike 13 at the midnight hour. "I am here! I am here!" the captain shouted from the rear of the room. "I was the man who stood at midnight beside the great Plymouth clock and heard it strike 13 instead of 12. What the prisoner says is absolutely true. I identify him as the man. On the night of the murder, at the very time it was committed, that man was with me at Plymouth, and we remarked to each other how strange it was that the clock should strike 13 at the midnight hour." The condemned man, proved innocent by the captain's testimony, was immediately set free. Think of it. Only one man in the world could prove that prisoner's innocence. And angels, by awaking a groom and a ferryman, and impressing them with an urgency they could not understand, and by leading the horse, had brought that one man into the courtroom at the precise moment that he was needed. Oh, how the angels must have loved it. The end of chapter 16. Chapter 17. The Bushman's Story. In the remote sandy wastes of the Kalahari Desert, in Bechuanaland, now known as Botswana, southern Africa, lived the primitive Bushmen. They had never known civilization. They lived where the white man seldom went and never stayed. Sakuba, a Bushman, was fully grown, but only 5 feet tall. When Sakuba and his family crept in out of the desert cold one night in 1953, they had no inkling that their way of life was about to change forever. Sakuba kept his bow and quiver of poisoned arrows near him. The Bushmen knew nature and knew her secrets. They knew where to find the roots that yielded the poison for their arrowheads. They knew where to find the shells of wild ostrich eggs that they could fill with water when it rained briefly. They knew the forbidden desert. They had survived incredible hardship. But generations of their way of life seemed to have almost effaced the image of their creator. Sakuba's family slept. But for him, the night was suddenly brighter than the day. And he talked with one who spoke from the fire that he saw. The next morning, he tried to tell his wife and family what had happened. Over and over, he tried. They attached great significance to dreams. But who had ever heard of a dream like this? What was the book he was talking about? And who was the shining one who had spoken from the fire so bright he could not look at him? And why must Sakuba go to the east to find the people who had the book and could tell him about God? Why did he feel he must leave this very day because of the angel's command? They couldn't comprehend it. How will you speak to the people you will meet? They wanted to know. The Bushmen spoke a language of clicks and guttural sounds, not at all like the languages spoken by the Bantu natives. No one would ever go to the Bushmen with books. Their language had never been reduced to writing. It was seldom that Bantus or whites ventured near them, for with their poisoned arrows shot from ambush, they were to be feared. But Sakuba told his family, "The book talks. The Shining One taught me the words of the book. I understood them, and I will be able to read them." His family made no attempt to remind him of the dangers he would find along the way. They were impressed too by his night vision, impressed enough to travel with him a part of the way. Each day they drew nearer the eastern border of Bechuanaland, hunting to sustain themselves. Finally, on the fringe of civilization, they found some scattered Bushmen who knew a little more about their Bantu neighbors. Sakuba left his family near them, and they believed his promise to return when he had found the people with the book. Clad in his skin loincloth, carrying his blanket made of animal hide, and a scanty supply of dried meat, armed with his bow and poison-tipped arrows, he advanced eastward, alone into the unknown, as the angel had directed. Many days later, 150 miles from his original starting place, Sakuba hesitantly approached the huts of some African Bantu farmers. The tribesman at the first hut was startled and not a little frightened to see a Bushman standing before him. But he saw that the bow in his hand was empty, so he did not flee. Sakuba waited respectfully for him to speak. "I see you," said the Bantu, according to African custom. With dignity, Sakuba returned the greeting and then asked, "Where will I find the people with the book?" The amazed Bantu could find no words for a moment, and Sekuba continued, "I have come to find the people who worship God." "You speak our language," the African burst out. "The Shining One taught me," Sekuba said simply, and then he told more about his night vision. "Can you take me to one who can teach me more of the book?" "This is marvelous," exclaimed the Bantu. "Yes, I can take you to our pastor. He lives near." They started out together, their progress impeded by excited Bantus who crowded around, wanting to see this Bushman who had been taught to speak the Tswana language by a supernatural being. It was near dusk when the group, it was a group now, for others had joined the two along the way, reached the humble dwelling that had real windows with glass panes. They told their excited story, and then the pastor wanted to hear it direct from Sekuba. The little Bushman was not awed by his strange surroundings. Rather, he was happy for the success of his mission and glad to tell of the vision that was responsible for his long journey. When he had finished, he asked humbly, "Have I found the people who worship God and have the book?" The pastor, deeply moved, entered his house and returned with a Bible in his hand. Sekuba's eyes lighted up. He clapped his hands softly and bowed his head as he exclaimed, "That is it! That is the book!" "This is the end of your journey," the pastor exclaimed. "You shall stay with me tonight." He led the group in prayer, and the Africans returned to their huts. Sekuba was made comfortable in the little hut that served as the pastor's kitchen. A servant prepared food for him. Then he lay down to sleep, happy to have found the object of his search. But that night, the angel came again. "This is not the true church," the Shining One said. "You must continue your search. You must find the Sabbath-keeping church and ask for Pastor Moyo. He will not only have the book, but also 4 brown books that are really 9. So, in the morning, Sekuba explained to his host, "I must leave you. I cannot stay here. The Shining One came in the night and told me to find a people who keep the 7th day as Sabbath." The pastor could not believe his ears. "This is the chief's church," he said with irritation in his voice. "Would the chief be wrong? You have not understood." Sekuba was respectful, but he was also firm. "Sir, I have not misunderstood. These things were shown me plainly. There are people who worship God on the 7th day. Please tell me where I may find them." Now there was anger. A crowd gathered. Sekuba was arrested for defying the chief's church, but he never changed his story. Finally, he was set free by the white commissioner, who felt something akin to awe as he saw an unlearned Bushman speaking Tswana and holding firmly to his story of angel instruction. Safely on his way again, Sekuba spent the night where darkness found him. But he was troubled. How could he find Pastor Moyo? What direction should he take? Alone in the desert, he talked with the unseen God and asked him to direct him, to give him some sign, and then he fell asleep. In the light of dawn, he saw near the distant horizon a small mist-like cloud that, in the clear, dry air bordering the desert, he accepted as his sign. Patiently, he followed it. For 7 days and 118 miles, it led him on. Carefully, he avoided roads and men, for one mistake was enough. Somewhere, it may have been before he left the shelter of the commissioner's court, he had acquired some European clothes. So now he did not look so conspicuous as he entered a little settlement. The cloud that had gone before him now disappeared. Would he be able to find Pastor Moyo? The next morning, a Bantu African directed him into the village, and he had no difficulty in finding Pastor Moyo's home. The pastor was startled at the sight of his visitor. Like other Africans, he harbored some fear of Bushmen. But as he studied his face, he knew that this was no ordinary African, and he invited him in. Once again, Sakuba told his story in Tswana while the pastor listened with growing awe and wonder. And the little Bushman said, as he finished the story, "I'm commanded to find the people with the book who keep the seventh-day Sabbath." Gladly, Pastor Moyo brought out his worn Bible and assured him that he had found the people he was looking for. "That is it," Sakuba exclaimed, but he had one more request. "Where are the 4 books that are really 9? Pastor Moyo turned to his bookshelf and brought out the 4 brown volumes bearing the title Testimonies for the Church. Every Seventh-day Adventist is familiar with these books from the pen of Ellen White, whose writing bears the marks and meets every test of inspiration. 9 volumes, at one time bound for convenience into 4 books. Sakuba was satisfied and delighted. He said eagerly, "You are the people." His journey was ended. But there was so much more to learn. All that day, they talked and read from the book. For 2 weeks, they studied together, and Sakuba drank it all in. Then Sakuba returned to his own people with the good news about Jesus, and Pastor Moyo visited them. It was discovered that the Bushmen, even with their primitive background, had phenomenal memories. They were able to memorize long passages of scripture in a short time without forgetting them. Sakuba became church elder, evangelist, and pastor of the first Bushman church. And he retained, until his death in 1957, the ability to speak, read, and write the Tswana language, the ability given him by the Shining One who spoke to him from the fire. You and I need make no long, tiring, dangerous journey to find the book. By comparison, the light that floods our path is blinding. Do we follow it as carefully, as persistently as did the little man from the African bush? The end of chapter 17 of It Must Have Been an Angel.